Hello, my name is Laurie Jackson, and I never imagined I would one day recount an experience like this. I'd always seen myself as an ordinary woman, living a quiet, unassuming life devoted to my third grade students, my family, and my faith. Yet, all of that ordinary existence was torn apart on the crisp autumn morning of November 6, 2024. That was the day I collapsed in my classroom, suffered a massive heart attack, and passed beyond the veil of this world. Clinically dead for several minutes, I was transported to a realm beyond anything I'd known, shown truths that shook me to my core, and transformed my understanding of life itself. I met Jesus, and he revealed to me the intricate, pervasive spiritual deception that holds sway over our technology, our societies, and even the ways we perceive one another across racial lines. His words reverberated through my very being, stirring awe and restructuring every belief I had held. The revelations left me breathless, and I knew I had to share every detail I could recall. The morning of November 6th began like any other. The air outside was cool and refreshingly crisp, an ideal autumn day that hinted at winter's approach. I awoke before my alarm, watching the early sun paint my bedroom in soft gold, sweeping across the quilt in gentle arcs. The scarlet and amber leaves on my maple tree outside shimmered as if aflame against the pale sky. I inhaled deeply, whispering my morning prayers, gratitude for another day, for my loved one's health, and for the gift of teaching young hearts. Everything felt familiar and at peace. I dressed in my usual teacher ensemble, a cozy lavender sweater that my students called our lucky color, and a pair of well-worn slacks. In the kitchen, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint spice of cinnamon from the tea kettle. My routine was sacred: a small cup of green tea sweetened lightly with honey, a slice of whole grain toast topped with raspberry jam, and a quick review of my lesson plans. I paused to straighten the stack of textbooks and tucked a printed poem for morning reading into my tote bag. That day, we were set to begin our unit on world-changing historical figures. I cherished moments when I could teach character, courage, and compassion alongside facts. Arriving at school, I was met by the bracing energy of children's laughter echoing down the hallways, the vibrant artwork taped to every classroom door, and that unmistakable blend of chalk dust and floor polish. My footsteps fell softly on the polished linoleum as I made my way to room 12, where bright posters of explorers and inventors lined the walls. This was my world, a space I'd come to love as much as my own home. My third graders poured into the room, a delightful whirlwind of curiosity and boundless enthusiasm. I knelt beside a small girl named Anne, whose puppy had gotten into garden fertilizer and whined all morning. Gently, I promised we would all whisper a prayer for her furry friend's quick recovery, and she looked up at me, her eyes glistening with hope as a tiny smile bloomed on her face. These simple acts of kindness always brought me closest to God, reminding me that love often speaks in whispers rather than grand pronouncements. The morning unfolded like a cheerful dream, reading aloud from a well-worn biography, diving into stories of remarkable individuals, then moving on to multiplication tables. I paused to admire the way sunlight danced on the globe at the center of the room and listened to the excited buzz of questions, children asking why Rosa Parks sat down, how Marie Curie discovered radium, what it meant to stand up for what's right. Never did I suspect that mere hours later everything I knew would unravel. It was shortly after lunch, around 1:20 p.m., when the unthinkable happened. The children were settling down after recess, their voices low and impatient for the next lesson. I stood at the front by the whiteboard, demonstrating a tricky long division problem. The dry erase marker in my hand let out a familiar squeak against the board. Then, without warning, a blinding bolt of pressure struck my chest. It felt like an explosive force that crushed the air from my lungs and sent a pulse of agony through every nerve ending. The marker dropped from my grasp with a soft clatter. I tried to draw breath, but each inhale met sudden resistance, as though the air itself had become thick. Colors around me dimmed, the reds and yellows of classroom decorations fading into muted gray. My students' once bright faces blurred into indistinct shapes, their murmurs stretching and warping into a distant metallic roar. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor. My final conscious thought was a panicked prayer. Lord, what's happening to me? Then, enveloped by darkness, I let go. I recall no pain from the fall, only that profound shift from chaos to absolute stillness. There was no fear, only an overwhelming sense of release, as if every weight had been lifted. Then awareness returned, but not in my body. I hovered near the classroom ceiling, weightless and serene, observing the scene below with a clarity beyond earthly sight. I saw my own form, Lori Jackson, lying motionless by the whiteboard. My teaching assistant, a caring young woman named Chloe, knelt beside me, her face ashen. "Lori, Lori, please wake up," she cried, her voice trembling as she grabbed the classroom phone. Her hands shook so violently, I thought she might drop it. She dialed 911 with urgency in her eyes. My students huddled in the back, confusion and fear marking their expressions, while another teacher ushered them out with gentle firmness. Then paramedics burst through the door, rushing in with their equipment. Shouts of "no pulse" and stark compressions filled the air. One of the paramedics, her brow furrowed in concentration, knelt beside me and pressed down rhythmically on my chest. "Stay with us, Lori," she urged, her voice tight with determination. I longed to respond, to reassure her that I felt no pain, that I was safe, but no words formed. I was pure consciousness, entirely detached from the frantic efforts below. Yet I saw everything with startling vividness: dust particles drifting in the sunbeams, the subtle weave of the classroom carpet, each individual chalk smear on the board. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing reality in true high definition. Then, in the midst of that turmoil, I noticed a figure at the doorway. My grandmother stood there, radiant, just as I'd known her in life. It had been 10 years since cancer claimed her, yet here she was, her silver hair shimmering, her gentle smile as comforting as ever. She wore the simple dress I remembered, and though she did not speak, her presence conveyed one unmistakable message: "You are safe, be at peace." In that instant, I understood fully. I was dead, and instead of terror, I felt a tidal wave of peace sweep over me, as though I'd set down a burden I'd carried unknowingly all my life. Stress, regret, fear, all dissolved in that current of calm. And then I saw the light. It began as a pinpoint beyond the classroom windows, unlike any earthly glow, alive with purpose. It expanded to fill my vision, a luminous presence that beckoned without burning my eyes. Its warmth embraced me, calling me forward gently, irresistibly. I felt myself drawn toward that radiance, every ounce of my being responding to its invitation. As I moved closer, I became aware of an infinite love so vast, so complete, so unwavering, that it transcended any human emotion. It was existence itself, the very essence of unconditional acceptance and belonging. As I moved closer, a love so profound, so complete, so unconditional, filled every part of my being. It was not an emotion, it was the very substance of this new reality. Not just something I witnessed, but something I was immersed in, an atmosphere of pure presence, unlike anything I had ever known. It felt like returning home after a long, wearying journey through a desert of sorrow and uncertainty. And now, finally, I was standing at the gates of peace. Then I heard a voice stop. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air, but something far deeper, a vibration, a resonance that came from within the very core of my being. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it was more familiar to me than the sound of my own name. "Lori, come." At once I knew who it was. There was no doubt, no question. It was the voice of my Lord Jesus, the same voice that had whispered into my spirit in my darkest nights, the same one that had carried me even when I felt forgotten. The moment I heard him, something in me stirred. I was no longer simply observing this radiant realm. I was part of it. I felt myself drawn forward into the heart of the tunnel where the light pulsed with life. It didn't feel strange or alarming. It felt right. It felt like something my soul had been waiting for since the day I was born, a return, not just to a place, but to a person, to the one who made me. With each step, or rather each movement, since I didn't feel my feet on the ground, the sensation of peace intensified. The warmth that embraced me was not just external. It wrapped around my memories, my shame, my disappointments, as if saying, "You are still loved. You have always been loved. Du är sen same, you are styven a memorowad." It was a love that saw everything. Every scar I tried to hide, every selfish act I regretted, every silent cry I never voiced aloud. And yet that love didn't shrink back. It moved closer. It wrapped around me like a blanket of light and whispered, "You are mine." As I passed deeper into the light, I felt what can only be described as a spiritual cleansing, a divine refinement. I felt layers fall off. The anxiety, the guilt, the bitterness I thought I'd buried. They peeled away effortlessly, not in judgment, but as if they had no place here anymore. As if they were never meant to be part of who I truly was. The light wasn't just surrounding me, it was pouring into me. It flowed through every corner of my spirit like a river washing away centuries of dust. I had never known such clarity, such peace. It was the purest feeling of being known, accepted, and finally home. I didn't need to ask who I would meet at the end of this journey. I knew. My soul recognized its origin. I was being drawn to the Creator himself, and as his presence intensified, I felt an awe I could not contain. I fell to my knees, not because I was commanded, but because every part of my being responded to the majesty before me. If reverence had a shape, it was this moment. It was the complete surrender of fear, replaced by the overwhelming joy of being fully seen, fully loved. Then he spoke again. His voice was thunder softened into a whisper. "Lori, rise." I did, and I saw him. For the first time, I truly saw his face. Words are too weak, too small to describe him. It wasn't just that he was beautiful. He was the origin of beauty itself. His face shone with ageless light, and his eyes, they held eternity. When I looked into them, I saw galaxies. I saw stories. I saw grace. I saw a kind of love that broke me open and put me back together all at once. And yet within that perfect love, I saw something I didn't expect. Sorrow. Not just sadness, but a deep soul-rending sorrow. A grief that reached back through centuries, touching every broken heart, every child abandoned, every injustice ignored. Why would he carry such sorrow? Before I could ask, he reached out and took my hand. The moment our fingers met, understanding rushed into me like a wave. I was no longer seeing just him, I was seeing with him. Through his eyes, the world opened up. I saw cities, homes, people. I saw hearts. I saw the confusion, the pain, the blind wandering of souls who had no idea they were walking into destruction. And I saw the great battle, spiritual and unseen, being waged over them. Tears blurred my vision. "Lord, what is this? Why is this happening?" He looked at me with eyes that held both fierce tenderness and unshakable truth. "Come, Lori, there sits more I must show you." Suddenly the tunnel of light lengthened, shifted, changed. I was gliding again, effortlessly, carried into something deeper. And then I heard it. Music. Not like the songs we sing on Earth. This was music made of stars, of oceans, of language and light. It was alive. Each note a spirit, each harmony a heartbeat of creation. Though I didn't know the language, my soul understood. It was worship, praise, love without limit. Then I noticed something else. The walls of the tunnel were alive with moving images of my life, not just as I remembered it, but as he saw it. I watched myself as a little girl, shy, hiding behind books, sitting alone during recess. I'd always felt invisible in those moments. But now I saw the truth. A glowing angel stood beside me then, hand on my shoulder, unseen but present. I had never truly been alone. I saw forgotten moments. The day I helped pay for groceries for a struggling mother. The time I comforted Anne when her world was falling apart. The countless silent prayers whispered in classrooms, on buses, in grocery aisles, each one had mattered. Each one had made ripples in the eternal. Tears flowed freely. "Lord," I said, my voice cracking, "I never knew it all counted." He smiled, gently. "Every thought, every action, every act of love, it shapes eternity, Lori. And yet, many still don't see. That's why I must show you what lies ahead." The light around us dimmed. In an instant, I was standing in a modern city street. People bustled past me. Life seemed normal, but something was wrong. Everyone was silent, their eyes fixed on glowing implants embedded in their wrists. No conversations, no smiles, Transactions were silent and seamless, their hands waving over sensors like programmed machines. In restaurants, families sat together but said nothing. They stared blankly into the air, eyes tracking invisible information disconnected from each other and from themselves. A chill ran through me. "What is this place?" I asked. "What happened to them?" Jesus' face was heavy with sorrow. "This is what awaits, Lori, if my people do not awaken." My heart broke. Then, in a breath, everything changed again. Now I stood in a realm unlike anything I had ever known, a place that felt more real than the earth itself. It was not heaven, not yet, but it was soaked in divine presence. The air shimmered with life. The ground pulsed with holiness. I breathed in a fragrance I can't describe, like every pure thing I'd ever encountered rolled into one spring rain, new blossoms, morning light, and worship. I stood still, taking it all in. There was no sun, yet a brilliant, gentle light was everywhere, radiating from a single, glorious source in the distance. And then he stepped forward into my full view. I had already sensed his presence, been touched by him, heard his voice, but now I saw him in his glory, Jesus. His robes were white beyond earthly imagination, so brilliant and flawless, they seemed to shimmer with the very essence of light itself. They flowed as if woven from purity, not cloth. His face, how can I begin to explain it? It was as if I had known that face forever and yet found it indescribable. There was familiarity and awe intertwined. His eyes, oh, his eyes, they contained galaxies of wisdom, fire without cruelty, mercy without weakness, and love so vast it nearly undid me. Without hesitation, I fell to my knees. It wasn't something I decided to do. It happened because it had to. My soul recognized him, not only as my savior, but as the very source of my life. He was the Word made flesh, the eternal one who spoke the stars into being, yet stood before me, present and personal. Then he spoke. His voice was creation and comfort in one breath. It carried the weight of mountains and the gentleness of a lullaby. "Rise, Lori. There's something I must show you." His hand reached toward me, marked by a radiant scar that glowed with divine history, and as it touched mine, a surge of light and truth entered my being. It was as if all at once I was filled with understanding too vast for words. I saw myself clearly, not just my actions, but my motives, my wounds, my fears, and the parts of me even I had hidden. He saw it all, and loved me without flinching. "Lord," I finally whispered, trembling, "why have you brought me here? Why me?" His gaze deepened. "Because the world is being swept away by deception on a scale it cannot even begin to comprehend. And you must see clearly in order to warn them. It is not too late yet." As he said this, everything around us shifted. The brilliant light began to ripple like water, and suddenly I was no longer in that place. I was seeing the world but through his eyes. Cities and nations appeared before me, veiled in a thick, creeping mist. It wasn't fog in the natural sense, it was spiritual, heavy, dark, alive. I saw people breathing it in, completely unaware. It blanketed media, governments, schools, and to my heartbreak, even some churches. "This is the deception," Jesus said. His tone was calm, but heavy with sorrow. I looked and saw people scrolling endlessly through their phones, absorbed in trivial distractions. Families, co-workers, communities, all moving through life in a fog, shaped by something they didn't know was shaping them. And then I saw it, technology, sleek and celebrated, heralded as the new savior of humanity. People flocked to sterile, polished clinics, receiving implants, glowing chips just beneath the skin, some on the hand, others on the forehead. But what I saw went beyond the physical. Spiritually, they were chains, shining, seductive chains that bound hearts and minds to something unseen. This, Jesus said, is how the foundation is laid, not by force, but by invitation. The enemy offers convenience in exchange for allegiance. Then I saw preachers, confident, charming, adored, standing behind glass podiums, declaring these technologies to be gifts from God. I saw congregations clapping, embracing the tools they believed would connect them more deeply to their communities, their churches, even to God. My heart burned with grief. Lord, can't they see? Don't they know what's written? His face dimmed with pain. They do not ask me. They ask the world. They lean on human understanding. They've traded the truth for comfort. They want relevance more than righteousness. I felt the desperate urge to shout, to run to those people and plead with them, but I couldn't. I was still inside a vision, a witness, a messenger. Then Jesus said softly, "Come, Lori, there is more." The vision transformed. I saw a river of humanity, every nation, every shade of skin, every language. But there were walls, walls I hadn't noticed before. They were invisible yet real, cutting people off from each other without them even realizing it. I saw black men and women carrying generations of grief and rage, the pain wrapped around their souls like barbed wire. Many didn't even know why. It had always been there. I saw white people burdened by shame and confusion, silenced by fear, unsure how to exist in a world that saw them as the enemy. Then Jesus said something that broke me. "They are not enemies, they are siblings." But they've forgotten. I gasped. The weight of the revelation landed like thunder. The division I had always seen as cultural or historical was being deliberately orchestrated. I saw shadows, demonic whispers, feeding lies into both sides, igniting old wounds, fanning flames of hatred and misunderstanding. To black people, they whispered, "You are unwanted. You must hold your pain tightly. It is your armor." To white people, "You are guilty. Nothing you do can redeem your past. You are unworthy of healing." And both listened. Jesus turned to me with urgency in his eyes. This is how the enemy keeps them in bondage, by twisting truth and weaponizing pain. But I died to break those chains. In my kingdom there is no black or white, no superior or inferior, only sons and daughters. I could hardly stand under the grief. I saw spiritual chains of bitterness, guilt, anger, thick and choking, wrapping around minds, cutting off clarity. I finally understood the sorrow I had first glimpsed in his eyes. His children were fighting each other, while the real battle was being ignored. Then Jesus looked at me again, voice steady but fierce. "Lori, the deception is great. Many will choose identity over truth. Many will reject my love because the lie feels more familiar." I dropped to my knees, crying in the vision. "What can we do, Lord? How do we fight this?" He reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. I felt a wave of divine fire course through my being, not burning, but refining. "Speak the truth. Tell them who they are in me. Some will listen, some won't, but the truth must be spoken." I was overwhelmed. What I had seen wasn't just darkness, it was a brilliant counterfeit, tailored to keep hearts comfortable while souls were slowly devoured. Tears blurred my sight. "Lord, how did it come to this?" He looked at me with such love that I could hardly bear it. "My people have forgotten who they are." Those words echoed in my soul. In that instant, a flood of images rushed into my spirit. Millions of people chasing success, approval, influence, pleasure, anything to feel whole, never knowing that they were already designed for something divine. Then, in a flash, the vision changed again. I found myself standing in a vast, radiant hall. But this was not a place of marble or stone. It was filled with light. Souls, countless souls, moved gently through the space. They weren't yet born, but they were real. They pulsed with promise. Each one was utterly unique, and each radiated a beauty beyond comprehension. Jesus stood beside me and said with deep reverence, "These are those yet to be born. Each one is sent to earth with a specific purpose from the Father. Each one is given unique gifts to fulfill their divine calling. But from the moment they enter the world, the enemy begins his work. He seeks to confuse them, wound them, weaken them, distract them, until they forget why they were ever sent." I watched, heartbroken, as these pure, radiant souls entered the world. The moment they were born, the battle for their identity and destiny began. Some were fortunate, nurtured in homes where they were cherished and led toward their divine purpose. But many others, too many, were misled from the start, swallowed by broken families, abuse, addiction, and pain, so deep it made them question if their existence even mattered. Others were enticed by the voice of culture, subtly convinced that their value was based on how they looked, how smart they appeared, how rich they became, or what they could achieve. It was all part of a master deception, a world system crafted by the enemy to keep them from discovering and living out the magnificent purpose God had written into their very design. My spirit wept. I turned to Jesus. Lord, I said, barely able to speak, how can we fight something so vast? How do we awaken them from this deception? He took my hands in his eyes blazing with love and gravity. Remind them of the truth, he said softly but firmly. Tell them they are not random or forgotten. Tell them they were formed by a loving Father for a glorious mission. And most importantly, tell them that I have never abandoned them. I've already made a way for them to return. Then he showed me something that stirred hope like wildfire in my heart. Amid the darkness, I began to see pinpoints of light flickering to life, tiny yet powerful. These were people who had discovered their purpose, who had surrendered to him fully. They refused to be ruled by lies. They were teachers, farmers, students, mothers, technicians, leaders, ordinary people carrying an extraordinary light. These, Jesus said, his voice filled with holy pride, are my warriors. They don't fight with the tools of man. Their strength is truth. Their weapon is love. I watched breathless as they moved through their communities. As they spoke truth, I saw the chains of deception breaking off others. The darkness shrank in their presence, unable to stand against the power of their light. It was undeniable. Even the smallest light pierced the deepest shadow. My soul burned with urgency. I have to go back, I said. I need to tell them. Jesus nodded, his face both kind and solemn. Yes, Lori, but there's one more thing you must see. The vision shifted again. I now stood in a city unlike any I had ever known. It was vast, futuristic, gleaming with glass towers and pulsing light. Holographic images danced across every surface, advertising messages in languages I didn't understand, yet somehow still knew. Despite the crowd, it was eerily silent. No laughter, no chatter, only motion. People walked in lines, perfectly spaced, their eyes glazed as they followed projections only they could see. There were no vehicles, no noise, no chaos. Everything was organized, efficient, sterile. Lord, I whispered, shivering, what is this place? Jesus looked out over the city, sorrow flooding his face. This is the path humanity will take if they follow the enemy's system to its end. This is what awaits them if they reject the truth. I looked around again. The people weren't hurting, but they weren't living either. There was no joy, no questioning, no creativity. They were fed, clothed, entertained, but they were slaves, unaware of their captivity. Then my gaze lifted. Above the skyline was an enormous holographic figure, a man, handsome, eloquent, adored. The people gazed at his image with awe, with love, with total trust. This, Jesus said, is the one the world will exalt. They will hand him their loyalty, believing he is their answer. But by the time they realize the cost, their chains will already be locked. I saw global campaigns promising peace, unity, safety. But behind the polished words and grand speeches was a dark, hungry agenda. People gave up their freedoms not by force but willingly, believing they were creating a better world. And then came the final horror. Massive lines of people moved through sleek facilities, one after another stepping forward to receive what was called the upgrade. I drew closer. They were receiving implants, tiny glowing devices inserted under the skin of their hands or foreheads. I gasped, Lord, is this the mark? He shook his head gently. Not yet, but this is the path to it. First they'll call it helpful, then essential. Finally, they will demand it, step by step, until no one can buy, sell, or live without it. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to shout, to beg them to stop, but they couldn't hear me. They were lost in the illusion. Safe, entertained, provided for, but blind. Lord, I cried, how do we stop this? He turned to me, eyes filled with a love deeper than oceans. Some will hear, some won't. But my sheep know my voice. Speak to them, Lori. Warn them while there is still time. Then, in an instant, I was back in the light, pure, radiant, alive. Everything I had seen weighed heavily on me, but now there was something else burning within me, purpose. Jesus looked at me, power and love radiating from him. There are already those who are awake, he said. The enemy cannot deceive them because they listen for my voice. These are the ones I've chosen to shine in the darkness. I saw them again, those warriors. Their lives weren't perfect, but they were fearless. They stood firm, even when mocked. They prayed, they worshiped, they refused to compromise. These, Jesus said, are not famous in the world, but in heaven they shine like stars. Their light will lead others to me. I wept, overwhelmed by both the beauty and the responsibility. Jesus then turned to me one last time, his voice calm but commanding. Go, Lori, go and tell them. My children will recognize what you've seen. Suddenly I felt it, that pull, that irresistible tug back toward the world. My spirit strained, not wanting to leave him. Lord, I don't want to go back, I whispered. I want to stay here with you. He smiled, gently but firmly. I know, but there are hearts waiting for your words. There are lives that will awaken because of what you share. It is not yet your time to stay. The light began to fade. The brilliance gave way to cold, to heaviness, to pain. I gasped, my body convulsed. Beeping machines rang out. My lungs screamed for air. And then, my eyes opened. I was back, in the hospital, and surrounded by blurry, tearful faces. My family, nurses, doctors. And in that moment, I knew without a single doubt I was alive, and I knew without a single doubt that I had to share what Jesus had shown me.